All right, so somebody asked me to do a video for this home run logic grid. This is on Brainzilla. This is the puzzle. You can see it's a little bit meant to be more of a difficult puzzle. Just as we kind of start out, I want to tell you, first of all, I don't like this puzzle. I didn't think it was very good. It ends up having two different ambiguous solutions where either one of these two cases could be the correct answer based on what the clues are. One of them is marked correct by Brainzilla and the other one isn't. And that's really the only way you can distinguish between the two of them. And I also found that there were a bunch of clues that I just never used when I did this puzzle. And I don't know, I found them kind of useless. So in general, I don't like this puzzle, but I did dig my way through it. And it is kind of a complex one. So I'm going to kind of walk you through this. I have some notes to kind of lead me through it in the interest of not making you watch me write everything down. But I will kind of explain my thoughts. So really quick, I'm assuming if you're working on this puzzle that you are somewhat familiar with logic grids and you're going to be able to fly through at least some of this beginning stuff. So looking at these clues that we have, this first clue I can't really do anything with just yet. But number 2, Charles is not in Atlanta, and then he wasn't number 17. Clue number 3, we're going to dive into this a little bit more. But for right now, I know that it tells me that in terms of their numbers, right? So from large to small, I know that second base is smaller than Diego, right? But bigger than Cincinnati. So what that tells me is that Diego has to be in one of the 2 biggest spots. Second place has to be in one of the 2 middle ones. And then Cincinnati has to be one of the 2 smallest ones. Okay. I also know from that one that Diego is not on second base, right? And I know that Diego is not in Cincinnati. And then similarly, I know second base does not go with Cincinnati. So we can get some more X's there. Okay, clue number 4. So in counterclockwise order, we're going to dive into this in a minute. But for right now, I know that neither Albert nor Charles can be number 66. Okay, they also can't play from Detroit. And I know 66 is not from Detroit. Okay, 66 is either Atlanta or first base. So all that gives me for right now is that Atlanta is not in first base. So I can cross that one out. If Bob played in Boston, so the if-then statements, they only work in 2 cases. They're only helpful in 2 cases. If I know Bob plays in Boston, then that tells me something. And if I know Cincinnati is not on third, that tells me something. Okay, but that's really all the 2 pieces of information. And for right now, this is useless. Actually, all of our if-then statements are kind of useless at the moment. 17 has to be on first or second, so I can put some X's in there. If Boston is at home, again, the if-then statements for right now aren't really helping me. But Atlanta and Detroit are in opposite positions and not 6. So Atlanta and Detroit are neither one of those are number 6. And they're in opposite positions. So when you think about a baseball diamond, right, you got home base, first, second, and third, right? So opposite positions. Right now, I know Atlanta's not on first base. So if Atlanta can't be here on first, that means Detroit can't be opposite them on third. So I can also cross that one out. Lovely. Okay, so that's going to be kind of just my start. Okay, so what I did then is I started diving into clues number 3 and number 4. And I made these lovely little tables to just kind of break down what my different cases are. So in terms of the bases, again, this was just my diagram to help me out of what order the bases went in. I just went through and put all of the possible ways these could be. So Albert's in home, they go counterclockwise. So that means that first place would be 66, second place would be Charles, third would be Detroit, or Albert could be first, and then they'd cycle through. So those are just all the possible cases. Okay, and then I looked at this and I tried to figure out, all right, what is a contradiction that I have here? And I looked over here with my clues, just checking everything. And one of the things that we've already said here is that Detroit can't be in third base. And in this particular instance, we had Detroit as third. So I eliminated this as a possibility. Okay. And since I eliminated that one, I can now say, okay, Albert's not in home base. I can say that first place doesn't go with number 66. 66 first base. Second base can't go with Charles. So Charles was not on second. And then Detroit isn't in third, which we already knew. Okay, great. So that helped us eliminate this a little bit. All right, so then this up at the top here, these are my 3 cases that are left with 2 additional pieces of information, and that's using clues number 11 and number 5. So clue number 11 says that if Albert is in first base, then he's number 66. This is my only one where Albert is in first base, so he'd be 66 there. And then for clue number 5, number 66 was either in Atlanta or on first. Okay, so number 66, either Atlanta or on first. In this first case, I have number 6 at first base, so 66 couldn't be there, which means it would have to go with Atlanta. Okay, and then kind of going through with the rest of these, clue number 5, sorry, let me read it again. 66 was either Atlanta or first base. What's my other contradiction? Oh, right. Sorry. The only case that we had where 66 was in first was this one that we eliminated. So that means that it has to be that he goes with Atlanta. So I can say that Atlanta has to go with 66. Okay, so that gave us a little bit of more information. So what I did from here is I noticed that when I looked at these 3 remaining clues, that each one of them had 2 cities, right? And that it had 2 people. And it's the same 2 cities and the same 2 people in all of them. So I made kind of a list of who was missing from this table. And then I looked through to kind of see, okay, well, where would they fit in? And I started using clue number 1. So exactly one of the letters match. Okay. So I looked at this guy and I said, okay, in this first little table here, what if Diego's the one who matches? So Diego's in Detroit. Okay, so if Diego's in Detroit, what does that mean? That means that Bob is going to have to be in Atlanta because that's the only spot that doesn't have a name. Okay, and then Cincinnati can't go with Charles. So Cincinnati would have to go here because if it did go with Charles, we'd have 2 with the same city that matched. Okay, so Cincinnati would have to go there and then Boston would have to go here. Okay. And then similarly, if I went through this and said, well, if Diego's not the one who matches, right, Bob can't be the one who matches. That just doesn't work with this particular clue. So my other match would have to be Cincinnati. So I'd have to say, okay, well, in that case, Cincinnati would match, right? Which means that Diego couldn't be here. So Bob would have to be here. Okay. And if Bob's there, Diego's here. And that means that Boston would have to be here. Okay. And I just went through for each of these 3 sets of my 3 like the typed out possible solutions, and I just went through like that and looked for like how they would match up. Okay, and to spare you watching me do all of that, this is what I came up with. So all of this stuff written in green here, those are the possible cases I came up with, and as you can see, I was then able to eliminate 3 of those cases by comparing back with my table. Okay, so for this one, when I looked, I said for this particular case, Diego would have to be in second base. But when I look back over on my table, we already said Diego can't be in second. So I crossed that one out. And I also crossed that one out in the 3rd column for the same reason. Okay. And then in the middle one, clue number 10 told me that if Bob is on 3rd base, then 66 is at home. Well, in this case, Bob is at 3rd, but 66 is also at 3rd. So I had to eliminate that case as well. Okay, so now I've narrowed that down even further. So here are all of those just typed up nicely. Okay, and then what I was able to do from here is I noticed when I looked through here that when I look at Bob, for example, is here, here, and here. He is always on either first or second base. So then I was able to come back to my grid and say, okay, Bob has to be on either first or second. Okay, and then similarly, right, if I look at, say, Diego is here or here or here. So he's always on home or 3rd. So Diego, I could come through and say, well, okay, he's either on home or 3rd. Okay. And then for the 2 cities that I kind of added in, because the only other ones that really helped were Boston and Cincinnati, right? If I looked at Boston, here, here, and here, Boston's either 2nd or 3rd, right? So Boston has to be either 2nd or 3rd. So I got some more X's. And then finally, Cincinnati, right, was here, here, or here. So Cincinnati was either home or first. So Cincinnati, home or first. So I got one more X there. The rest of the table, like I checked them all, but none of them gave me anything else extra. So we have a whole bunch of X's. Oh, and one more thing, right? We found out earlier that 66 has to go with Atlanta, right? So I can now add that to my grid as well. And that does give me one additional X because we said that number 66 doesn't go with Albert. So if 66 goes with it, if 66 goes with Atlanta, then Albert can't go with Atlanta. So that does give me one more X there. Okay, lovely. So we had that. All right, so then what I did is I labeled these top 3 cases. I called them X, Y, and Z, and now I'm going to dive into the number table at the bottom that we've been kind of neglecting for all this time. Okay, so this number table is just kind of looking at clue number 3, and I just laid out all of the possible ways that could happen. So these are all the possible layouts of that ordering where Diego has to be first and then second and then Cincinnati. We don't know that they're one after the other, so there could be a gap in there somewhere, and these are just all the possible places that could work out. So then I started tying these guys together, and I looked at these and I said, okay, for each one of these cases in my number table, could they go with cases X, Y, or Z up top? Okay, and I found that for this first one, I have 66 being in second place. The only time that happens up here is in case X. Everywhere else, 66 is somewhere else. So if that's going to be true, then that has to go with case X. Okay, similarly, Diego being with number 66, the only time that doesn't happen is here. Okay, everywhere else Diego goes with 66. So that is why I eliminated X. That one has to go with Y or Z. Okay, and then for these last two, so we said Diego has to go with 66. Right here, Diego goes with 66. Here, Diego goes with 66. Right, but in this particular table here, I have Diego with 81, so that's a problem. So that one was eliminated. And then this last one was eliminated for the same reason as the first one was, right? The only time that happens is at X, case X rather. So I'm sorry, they're not eliminated, but they go with case X. They can't go with Y or Z. Okay, lovely. So these are my possible cases. And then I said, all right, well, let me start kind of narrowing that down. So for the 3 that I knew had to go with case X, I typed all that up. So I just took case X and I copied that down for this bottom table and looked at what it was. And then I checked for contradictions. So this first column, I have that 17 is number 6. That's a problem. So I'm eliminating this as a possibility. Okay. This third column, I have 2 Atlantas, so that's a problem. All right, and this last column we can also eliminate because you can see here Charles is supposed to be number 17, but when I come back over to my grid, that is one of the things that we already eliminated. So we already said that that wasn't a possibility, so I can also cross this guy out. And that leaves me with just this guy right here, and it could either go with option Y up here or option Z up here. Okay, and that's what this is. So I just kind of broke it down and said, okay, if it's option Y, this is it. And if it's option Z, this is it. And the problem from here is that once we get to this point, it's ambiguous. Like I can go through and check off some things. Like for example, Detroit always goes with Bob. So I can come over here and say, okay, Bob's definitely from Detroit, right? And we can definitely check a few things off. But the issue is that both of these are potential solutions. So when I filled these out and I actually look at these 2 different cases, this is one of the 2 cases, and I believe that Brainzilla says that this one is correct, and it says that this one is not. But I've gone back through and looked at all the different clues, and there is nothing in this second solution that contradicts any of the clues. So there's no reason based on what's given to me that couldn't be the solution. Okay. And then additionally, like I kind of said before, a lot of these things I never even used, right? The player from Boston is at home base. The player from Boston was not at home base, and I never even used that clue. Like I never even used the fact that like, oh, Charles isn't 81 and therefore. So there are just lots of things in here I didn't use. You ended up with an ambiguous solution. It was a very challenging problem to try to like work my way through, but ultimately I did not find it very satisfying. I don't think it was a very good logic problem. And I just mostly found it an exercise in frustration. So yeah, that is basically it, right? These are the 2 potential solutions. And hopefully you kind of found that helpful. I'm sorry if that was frustrating for you as it was for me.